Welcome to Sharing Socks, a much delayed edition. Very unusual for us to miss a week during the regular season, but one of us, the younger one, has been on jury duty for a couple of weeks, and that has really backed us up. I'm Leigh Allan, the duty geezer for Southside Sox, and with me, my son, and usually he's the West Coast correspondent, Will. I'm sitting in his kitchen, so we're both West Coast correspondents this week. And with us, a very special guest whom we have put off and put off unfairly because Will's been at jury duty. Neil Paine is a senior writer and general editor for 538, or if you prefer the full formal name, 538.com, which I know from comments and content and articles on Southside Sox, many of you are familiar with. For those who are not, 538 begun by master statistician Nate Silver back in the aughts. And as you might guess from the number 538, it's not coincidence that that's the number of electoral votes in the US. It began as a political aggregation and analyzation site, and then spread into many other fields. And of course, if you're going to spread into fields in your statistics nut, you go into sports. And if you get into sports in your statistics nut, you go to baseball and get plenty of that. As I understand it, Neil, your background was originally in basketball, really. You worked for the Atlanta Hawks?
Yeah, that's right. First of all, thanks for having me on the show, guys. I have to say a little bit of the delay was on me also because I had a little bit of a snafu getting to a place where I could record coming home from a Mets game a couple weeks ago. So I thank you for bearing with me through all that.
What we want to do now, Neil just posted a couple days ago a brilliant piece on the big controversy of 2022, the ball, and the balls that are not leaving parks, which those of us who are old-time baseball fans are very happy about, but a whole lot of people who are used to hitting the ball a long way are not happy about. So that can go either way according to your taste. But what we want to get to is that 538 every year predicts how the season's going to turn out. Now, everybody with a keyboard does that, but very few then keep following through. Most of them would just as soon you forgot what they said very quickly. And amongst them, like PECOTA is one that famously does that, which in looking up information on Neil, I found out Nate Silver founded PECOTA as well, which is interesting because your numbers don't agree. So somewhere the algorithms split. I mean, they're close, but they don't agree. But 538, after every game finishes, 2 minutes later, boom, they have made some kind of alteration on how many games they predict a team will win, what their chances are of winning their division, of making the playoffs, winning the World Series, and so forth. And what I'd really like to do is go back, because you rate every team, you give it points, kind of between 14 and 1600. It's Dodgers to Orioles, basically, and this way it goes. Season is coming up. How do you determine those team values, and then where do you go from there?
Yeah, so those ratings, those numbers, that 1400 to 1600, that's this number called the ELO rating, which I can kind of get into how that works. But when we're sort of setting it up for the season, usually when you have an ELO rating, it's designed to show like the current strength of a competitor, whether it's a team, whether it's an individual in an individual sport. It's been kept for tennis and things like that. It started out in chess. It's actually a rating that tracks the quality of like the world chess rating. So if you know who the number one player in the world is, I think it's Magnus Carlsen. He has some kind of astronomical ELO rating, and it relates to his odds of beating an opponent with another rating, and his probability of winning that chess match is based on the difference between the two ratings. So that's sort of the background on ELO. But when we're going into a season, nobody's played any games yet this season, so we have to come up with initial ratings. And you mentioned PECOTA. There's a lot of places out there that do these empirical ratings of how good a team is supposed to be based on the talent on the team. And so we, in the spirit of what we do for a lot of things like polls and various other sort of forecasts that we make, we aggregate together all of the various different, major publications, whether it's Fangraphs, Baseball Prospectus with PECOTA, Vegas odds, and also last year's ratings. And this is kind of an interesting component of it as well, is we found that in baseball, it's a sport with a lot of randomness, a lot of what we call regressing to the mean. So if you have an outlier performance, either good or bad in a given season, it tends to come back toward that 500, that 81 and 81, or in ELO parlance, a 1500 rating. That's basically the perfectly average rating. You get dragged back toward that by a somewhat significant degree relative to other sports between seasons. So we sort of take a weighted average of all of those different inputs, the different computer systems and the Vegas odds, and a regressed version of last year's rating, and put it all together, and we get sort of that preseason rating out of that. And the way that we put it together, the amount of weight that we give to the different ones is based on how accurate each has been in the past at predicting these types of things. So, we give less weight to last year's rating relative to something like a computer power rating that knows who has changed teams between years, because it's part of the equation, but the thing that knows about player movement obviously gets more weight. And something like the Vegas over-unders get a lot of weight, because that is, no one has yet found a pure computer algorithm that can beat the wisdom of crowds in Vegas. They're very smart, and also they have a lot of money on the line. So it tends to make you really smart really fast when you have that situation set up. So all of those things kind of get mashed together into the power rating that you see on our site in preseason. And then we run it through the schedule 100,000 times, and we track how often each team wins the World Series, wins its division. And of course, we had to kind of revamp those that setup when we were adding the new playoff slots for this year, and tracking the different tiebreakers and stuff there. And then as the season goes on, and you mentioned that, within minutes of a game ending, we sort of pull the score. We know who started the game. We know how well each starter performed, and most importantly, what odds we gave to each team going in. And we'll update each team's rating off of that, sort of in proportion to how unexpected the result was. So if you have a situation where, the Orioles are playing the Dodgers, and the Dodgers win by 5 or something like that, we really wouldn't change either team's rating that much, because it's like, that's not all that surprising. You didn't have to really, I'm not falling out of my seat here over that. Now, if the Orioles won 15-0, we would change the Dodgers and Orioles ratings, not by a huge amount, but like you would notice that change, overnight when that happens, because it was a very unexpected result. And that's sort of the elegance of that ELO system. Just to tie it back to that, is it's a zero-sum game. The two teams are sort of pushing shared points to the middle of the table when they play each other. And then based on the result, one team will take, some points from the other team in terms of their rating after the game if they won. And it really is it's a self-correcting system. So if we end up being wrong about a team a lot, and they have a lot of unexpected wins, then it will sort of catch up to that over time, and it'll think, hey, this team keeps winning. We don't think of them that highly, and yet they keep doing this. We should give them more rating points, and eventually it sort of equalizes out where they get properly rated, we hope, if we've done our job right over the course of a season. Now, it's not instantaneous, and there's injuries, and there's, a million factors that make baseball the game that we love, and it's very unpredictable. But that's essentially the core of the system, of like how it works from the start of the season, and as we go through the season, how we update what we think about each team based on what we see from them on the field.
What you mentioned injuries. Do you make a change if somebody goes, and we're going to be White Sox centric in our questions, but in your answers, go wherever you want. Lance Lynn is out for 2 months. Does that then, before any game results, alter the point value that you would, for example, give to the White Sox?
Yeah, for a starting pitcher, it would. So we know about all the injuries through the different sort of depth chart based systems going into the year. So even if you're like star, right fielder is out, or second baseman, or whatever, catcher, that would be picked up in the predictions that we've aggregated from the different algorithms. Once the season gets started, we don't really know. We don't have like adjustments for individual batters being out during the year. That sort of has to show up in if a team's offense falls apart part, it's sort of inferred from their drop off in performance. But for starting pitchers, we actually would take into account injuries that happen in real time, because each game, and I should have mentioned this earlier, when we're giving the odds of two teams against each other in a given game, that's not just based on the strength of the two teams sort of in the abstract or kind of in a vacuum over the course of the whole season, but it also has an adjustment for who the particular starting pitchers are for each game. So if you're sending your ace to the mound versus your fifth starter or some scrub that you put in, it can have a surprisingly large effect on your probability of winning the game. Like, it gets super extreme where I think it was Pedro Martinez in 2000, when he was starting for the Red Sox, their odds were like over 70%. And when he wasn't starting, their odds were in like the low 40s or something like that. Like, it really can swing things when you're talking about an all-time ace pitcher. The best pitchers, even in the game now, are less than that. There's not really a Pedro type of talent in the game right now, but so that is also taken into account. So if Lance Lynn goes down, or any starter that carries a sizable adjustment for any given start, then you're going to get downgraded over the rest of the season, or until he's expected to come back. And we'll pull from who the probable starters are, so it kind of tapers off over time. It'll be felt acutely in the near term. So Max Scherzer, I'm a Mets fan. When he gets scratched from a start, it'll drop. We know what starts he was scheduled to make over the next week or two, so it'll drop really hard for those starts that he was scheduled for. But then into the future, we sort of take like an average of the team's rotation and their current rotation strength for future games, games months in the future, because we don't know who will make each start. And so it'll be a little bit less pronounced, but it'll definitely dock the overall projected quality of a team's rotation for its games later in the season.
So you're saying it really doesn't change your evaluation if a position player gets it, or a reliever is going to be out for a long time. What if there's a trade that is a considerable upgrade for a team, for a position player? I get Manny Machado. I mean, does that change your ratings, or does that just come into play as you go?
Yeah, that's another one that it sort of has to figure out as you play better over the course of the season. And this is something where, like, the great thing about this system is we can make it more complex if we want to. And especially if there's like research that we find, either there's new data or just, sort of we feel like testing something that we add, like a new wrinkle. And we've done this a lot, probably most notably in our basketball model, where we kind of tore the whole thing down. It used to work much like this baseball model that I'm describing. And for various different reasons why the NBA is kind of weird compared to other sports, we tore the whole thing down and made a system that was purely based on player ratings. And so that would know about trades and injuries and all the whole 9 yards. But in baseball, we found in the past, when we've kind of looked at it, and maybe it's due for another look, but like any given one position player doesn't tend to move the needle for a game to a significant degree that would probably warrant making those. Now, if you're talking about like 2 or 3 injuries or trades that you make that make fill important holes in the lineup, that's when you start talking about like, hey, maybe that, we would start to think about putting in an adjustment for that. So maybe that's something that we put in for the future. It's a little like we did for the NFL, we put in quarterback adjustments because there was like a year where every starting quarterback was getting hurt. And we got really lucky because we had said the Eagles were favored in the Super Bowl against the Patriots because it thought that Carson Wentz was still their starter. It still had like elements of that from their from earlier in the year, because he was playing great and they were playing great at that time. And so people were like, aren't you going to dock the Eagles? And I was like, I wish we could. We don't have a quarterback adjustment in the model yet. We ended up lucking out with that, but I don't think you can count on Nick Foles leading your team to I don't need to tell you guys that, probably leading your team to a Super Bowl every year. So we put in a quarterback adjustment that now knows when a quarterback is out. And that's a similar situation where our research has shown that and you see this with the Vegas lines too, non-quarterbacks in football, other positions, they just don't really move the line. They don't move a team's odds all that much. Maybe a very important receiver or defensive end or something like that would move it by like a half a point one way or the other. But if a quarterback goes down, you could see the line move. Like Aaron Rodgers misses a game last year, it moved it by like a touchdown or something. So, I think it's similar where we see just, baseball is such a sport of small things adding up over time that for any given one game, your accuracy of predicting it doesn't really change that much if like one guy is injured from a lineup, or you add, you upgrade a little bit at shortstop, or something like that.
I'm gonna do my civic duty and pause us for a moment here to take our ad break. Neil, this has been awesome so far. Hang with us. We'll be right back on Sharing Socks. And welcome back to Sharing Socks. We're still here with Neil Paine, who has thrown out so many ideas and concepts here that my brain is about to explode, but I think the geezer's hanging in there. So far, it's been absolutely fascinating. And before we finish today, I am going to make you give me a bold prediction for my Burbank Rec League softball team, which I think our rating.
What's your OPS?
Well, I haven't calculated that. I am batting 1,000 personally, but we've also lost multiple games by more than 30. So let's keep our conversation going though.
When you go to, you mention all the sources you go to. Are there some, and you mentioned you lean on some that are forward-looking more than the ones, excuse me, that are backward-looking. Are the particular ones you found more reliable? Because you don't look at individual players, you're saying that, other than starting pitchers. Are there ones that you find more valuable in evaluating the starting lineup, in determining, I don't know if they use WAR values or what they may do?
Well, we definitely love we have a soft spot for PECOTA, especially like you mentioned, Nate, being the alumnus of Baseball Prospectus and kind of the creator of the original version of that model. I also really love the Fangraphs, the way that they update things in season, where they have, the depth charts that change. That was a major inspiration for our NBA system there. So we give both of those. It's almost like choosing between like your favorite children. Like we don't really play favorites with that. We'll give those equal weight relative to each other, but we give those things a lot more weight than something that is just, kind of based, like you mentioned, backwards looking, or based on leading indicators, but things that may not, tell us the full picture about the team's roster right now. I mean, there's still a lot of value in that, in terms of looking at teams that, either exceeded or fell short of expectations based on something like run differential, or something like predicted run differential, if you really want to get into the weeds with things like base runs like they have at Fangraphs. So, those things still matter in terms of predicting which teams will do better or worse next year. And those are kind of baked in to some of the assumptions we make off the backwards looking things. But then, there's no substitute for projecting out the expected playing time and expected WAR of each player in a team's lineup and a team's pitching staff.
Now, we've done our ELO ratings. We're 1,400, 1,600, somewhere in there. You've run your thousands and thousands of seasons on your tiny little computer that you have in your hand.
It's very tiny.
and you've come up with a record for every team in the majors, which then changes if they win or lose when they were expected to win or lose, etc. Now you use those records then to go to a prediction of winning your division, making the playoffs, even winning the World Series, and we get down to very small numbers. We have a situation, again, we'll use the White Sox as an example. You have them as a higher, better team than the Twins, but they're 4.5 games behind the Twins. So you still have the Twins as more likely. You guys are, you hedge a lot. You have a lot of more likelies and everything, as the more
kind of our thing.
More likely team to win the division. How does it go through those steps?
Yeah, so each individual simulated season, because we do take the current ratings, and then we use those. They almost branch out into like each simulated season is its own little kind of snowflake of a universe where we don't just base every game that a team has over the rest of the year on their current rating. Like the White Sox right now are a 1528. They're not going to be a 1528 in all of their remaining games. It actually would look at like, it'll have a simulation for their next game. And if they win it, then their odds in this universe, their ELO rating would go up to like a 1530 or something. And it moves around. So if they go on like a super hot streak in this fictional universe that we're kind of playing out, which again is like 1 of 100,000, then their rating will kind of rise. And it creates this, it mimics the way real baseball works in the sense of, in the seasons where you get really hot and there's special seasons and they're magical years, you're obviously going to be a better team in those subset of years where you win a division or you go to the playoffs or you go to the World Series than you are in sort of the average season across all possible outcomes that you have over the rest of the year. So we try to kind of mimic that by running these ratings hot and these simulations hot, where it's like your performance is modeled also in kind of a real-time fashion, even for remaining games in the year. And so we think the advantage of that is it gives a much more realistic distribution of outcomes for a team, because, if we just use like a static rating of what we thought a team was right now, that doesn't really take into account the uncertainty that we have around each team's kind of true quality, which we know we're only a third of the way into the season, not even that. We know that there's so much variance around what we think of as a team's true quality right now that you have to account for that uncertainty around each team. And so we think that that's kind of an elegant way of doing that. And it creates these great little snapshots where I don't have the simulations in front of me, but you could call out like a random number, like give me simulation 53,220. I could conceivably go into that, find that, and actually give you the standings from that particular alternate universe and tell you, hey, how did the White Sox do? Did they make the playoffs? Did they, go to the World Series? And, in 3% of all the simulations that we run, they win the World Series. So maybe that random one that I just called out, they did win the World Series in that. So it is this kind of almost like view of the multiverse of possibilities that each season has, that I think actually kind of speaks to how we all feel about baseball too, and the way that, we don't know what is in store for a team. And you saw it even last year with the Atlanta Braves. I'm not going to sit here and say that we thought that they were going to, go on that run that they did in the second half of the season, but there will have been some simulations where the thing that actually did happen played out in our, predicted situation in one of those alternate universes. So it does kind of capture those weird things that do, I think, happen in baseball a lot more than other sports, where you could be a team that seems like they're left for dead and something happens that, in the case of the Braves, made a lot of really shrewd trades and guys picked up their performances and, they were off and running. But baseball is a funny sport like that. And it takes a lot of games to know a team's true quality, more than we could ever actually play in a season. And that's what gives it that really unpredictable kind of style to it that I think we're all kind of drawn to.
Yeah, I read somebody at 538, might have even been you, saying that baseball is the hardest sport to predict because it is the events can be so random.
Not only is it the hardest sport to predict, but I believe, and we have this interactive called Checking Our Work, where we look at our predictions across everything. I believe the single most difficult thing to predict across everything that we do, whether it's politics, sports, everything, is baseball predictions. It's kind of funny when you think about it that way, that of all the different things that you could possibly predict, baseball is the one where you have to make the prediction for a given game closest to 50-50, which would be a totally coin flip. It takes no skill to make a 50-50 prediction for every single game. And yet baseball is only a little bit removed from that. And I think that that's so interesting because it does speak to the inherent kind of chaos and randomness of the sport that makes us interested in it. There are at the other end of the spectrum, it's less true now than it was a few years ago, but like the NBA is a very deterministic sport traditionally, and the same teams tend to win over and over and over again. A little bit, you're getting a little bit of that maybe even with the Warriors this year if they end up winning, but it's not the same team, but it's got a lot of the same people. But the Warriors of a few years ago, it was like Warriors are playing the Cavaliers every single year in the finals, and that can be a little boring after a while, whereas in baseball it's like you get a nice mix of like just totally weird random teams making the World Series over time. And
Not true when I was a kid and the Yankees were there every year. But
well, that's interesting too. Also, is I think that as they've expanded the playoffs and really done a lot of these things, I know that the motivation
the
for that,
draft and that kind of thing changed everything.
yeah, the motivation for all these things is not to give a more random sample to statistics types like me. It's to make money and to get people interested, and kind of make people feel like anyone could win. But a side effect of that is you really do get to see the different ways in which the structure of the game influences the randomness that comes into play. So yeah, if we went back to the system where like the team with the best record in each league just went straight to the World Series, yeah, you'd have a lot of dynasties. You'd kind of get back that more predictable sense of the game. But they've taken it in the other direction, and it shows no sign of letting up in that way.
Let's go on to your game by game. Like for example, we're recording this on a Thursday afternoon tonight. If it doesn't storm out, Michael Wacha against Dallas Keuchel, Red Sox and the White Sox. You put a huge preference to home teams when you're picking games. I will say it's on the mobile site. You don't really show your work as much on the full site. And 538 is really good about this, and everything you do. If you're on the full site, you like we were taught in math class, you show your work every time. So I can look at every game and I can say, this is how much you gave to the team rankings, and this is how much you gave for the home team, which is usually 24 points on your scale. Although you claim that the differential is based on how far they have to travel and the inconvenience, yet you gave 24 points to the Cubs for the 9-mile trip that the White Sox had to make up for.
I think that also has it might have rest days mixed into it. I don't know whether how that worked into it as well, but that's another factor in there.
Individual games, you are very close. You're giving 52 to 48%. Your range maybe is 67-33 down to an exact 50-50. You can look at it. If somebody's on a mobile site, they don't see it. What are the steps to predict a game that end up at a certain percentage?
Yeah, so the base of all of the predictions is that ELO rating, which takes into account essentially how the team has been playing with an emphasis on recent games and tries to estimate their true talent at any given time. Then we put that starting pitcher adjustment that I mentioned earlier onto it. So in this particular case, Keuchel, who has been getting lit up at times this year. I actually listened to that Guardians game where he gave up whatever it was, 10 runs in the first, whatever it was.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was brutal. But so he's a minus 42 relative to the White Sox kind of baseline pitcher, whereas Wacha's only a minus 6. So that takes sort of the Red Sox inherent 3-point ELO advantage and expands it out at that point. Then the White Sox are playing at home, so that brings things back. You mentioned 24 points. That's basically the baseline that we give to a home team. And then there's these small adjustments that we make based on travel distance. Again, can't really explain why the trip from the south side to the north side or vice versa was worth whatever it was in that crosstown game. But also rest days, like I mentioned as well. We found that teams perform better when they are coming off more days of rest, up to I think 3 days of rest, which makes sense also. And so all those things are kind of added together to give you the pregame rating, which is unique to each game because all of the different factors change. You could have, even if your base rating stays the same across time, you're going to have different starters. Sometimes you'll have more rest or less distance traveled or more distance and so forth. And so that's how you get the rating going into the game, and then that's turned into a probability through the ELO system, which is essentially the same as it is for all the different sports that we look at, and the same as it is in chess. Really, once you have the two ELO ratings, it's very easy to kind of convert it to a win probability for any given sport. The difference between the different sports is just the magnitude of kind of the range of the ratings. So you mentioned in baseball, they're very compressed. You don't see games where the favorite has really much more than a 60% chance most of the time, or the underdog below a 40% chance. If you looked at this for football or for basketball, it's going to range a lot more. And, sometimes you'll have games where like the favorite in the NFL is like over 90% to win or something like that. So another reason why baseball is just such an unpredictable sport comparatively, we're trying to maximize the predictive accuracy of each of these game by game predictions. And so in order to do that, through our testing, we have found that you have to really hew close to that 50-50 for each game. And so, you only get small differences from 50-50 to get the best predictions.
How much have changes in managerial use changed your algorithms through the years? I'm thinking of the use of openers and the use more generally of starters going many fewer innings than they did just a few
So
years
how
ago.
has Kevin Cash altered what you did?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you ask about that, because we had to put in a specific opener kind of tweak. We knew that the opener was kind of a thing for the past few years, but it was very isolated, didn't really come up in like super important games. I guess you had, some situations where like the Brewers threw out a lefty to fake out the Dodgers and then took him out immediately and put in a righty. Like there are weird things like that, edge cases that we had to work with. But really in recent years, you're having, teams put openers in crucial playoff games where it was just throwing our system for a loop. And we had to put in a very special opener adjustment for that. So that changed it for sure. And even, the decreased use of starters affects our rating, not in a way that we sort of set out to make a tweak to it or anything like that, but just by simple nature of the fact that we use this stat called game score to create our pitcher adjustments. It's a Bill James stat where he grades a pitcher basically on like a 0 to 100 scale. It can go over 100 if you have like an awesome start. So, like Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game or whatever, that was over a 100.
It can go below 0 too, can't it?
Yeah, I think you can go below 0. Maybe Keuchel was below 0.
I think Michael made it.
I
Yeah.
really don't want to pick on him, but that's where we're at. But anyway, so it can range in this fashion for, it's based on historical standards of what a great start or a really bad start look like, and those standards really have changed over time with different ways that starters are being used. You're getting less impressive game scores. Basically, like the top range of game scores are you'll have the occasional game that still looks like an elite start from 20, 30 years ago or whatever, but for the most part, they're really not as impressive. And so the pitcher ratings are sort of less outlierish on either end, but especially on the high end than they used to be. And so then that filters into the game predictions, because you will now see that when starters now have a lower predicted effect on the game, they're going to have a lower adjustment on a team's rating, which will then cause them to exert less of a change on a team's win probability. So that's sort of a way that the system kind of corrects for the way managers are using pitchers, but it shows up tangibly in sort of, take your average ace from 30 years ago. They're going to have a larger effect on the team's win probability than the average ace in 2022, just because they stick around less and they have less of an effect on the game, and bullpens are being counted on to kind of carry more of the load and influence the outcome of games more.
Well, that's about all the time we have. I feel like I could listen to you talk about this for days.
Yeah, it's been great.
It's so fascinating. Because it's not a Yankee podcast, I do want to give you a quick chance to plug your Mets podcast on here. Can you remind me the name of that?
Yeah, it's called Panic City, and we put out episodes once a week, roundabout on Thursdays. And yeah, we just talk about the Mets and talk about how they've been doing, with a focus on, we call it the podcast for the roiling emotions inside of every Mets fan. So it's really about this tension between, our analytical side and our pessimistic emotional side about how we know everything is going
we're
to
there.
come.
Yeah, I feel like as White Sox fans, we can relate very, very closely to you.
I want to quickly plug 538. For those of you who have not gone to it, 538, all small letters, all one word, all small letters.com. And
It's the best.
just do baseball and search, or even baseball predictions and search. You'll have to scroll a while because I keep updating. Like I say, Neil did this great piece you need to read on home runs and exit velocities and what's more precisely what's happening, other than, gosh, there aren't many homers anymore, that to take a real, because we're stats nerds, right? Take a look at it that way. But Neil, thank you ever so much for coming on with this. It's been terrific.
I really appreciate it. Appreciate your flexibility with my schedule. And yeah, I'd like to come back anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Neil. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you all listening, especially you, Dallas Keuchel. I know this was a hard one to get through, but we hope you're doing okay. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time on Sharing Socks.